When we think of outsiders, it is not often that soldiers and their families come to mind. In the early modern period, however, they often were mobile, reliant on plunder, comfortable with violence, and often differing in denomination. These soldiers were commonly excoriated as debauched, bloodthirsty villains. While soldiers sometimes lived up to this stereotype, however, the reality is complicated. In fact, early modern armies were not so much other as another, not so much outside community as part of alternative communities, which sustained their members even as they competed with others. These armies did not contain only soldiers either, but were composite entities. Wives and children often followed their husbands to war. Prostitutes and pawnbrokers, sutlers and farriers also followed the armies, and they formed altogether a mobile community with both physical and spiritual dimensions. Within this human collage, my focus today will be on military chaplains, the ministers to these mobile communities. Early modern military chaplains took an active role in a perennial Christian debate over whether, to paraphrase Luther, soldiers could actually be saved. As pastors to soldiers, they argued that their parishioners could be both brave warriors and exemplary Christians. Understandably, this position alienated military chaplains from anti-war groups like Quakers and Anabaptists, as well as from many war-ravaged communities. Especially in times of protracted war, chaplains thus stood as outsiders in a crossfire of anti-clerical, anti-governmental, and anti-war sentiment. This struggle with outsiderness is well illustrated in the life of the Lutheran Johann Ludwig Hocker, an early 18th century military chaplain from Ansbach. Hocker wrote a memoir focused on his career as a military chaplain. It is this document which allows us to investigate not only the phenomenon of military chaplains as outsiders broadly, but also a personal experience of these realities. Hocker, son of an Ansbach cleric, was a highly capable pastor and scholar. After graduating from the University of Jena in 1694, Hocker returned to Ansbach, but was unable to find a job in education or the church. He was, however, hired by a noble family as a tutor. Gaining patronage, Hocker was soon appointed instructor of history, genealogy, and geography at the essentially ROTC, Noble Cadet Academy, started by Margrave Georg Friedrich in Ansbach. This position was temporary and was also somewhat outside the normal paths of advancement for one with Hocker's education. On the other hand, the Cadet Academy offered proximity to the Margrave and attracted noble students from all over Central Europe. These connections ensured that Hocker was not simply other, stuck outside looking in at the normal routes to promotion. His outsider status as a teacher, and later pastor to soldier nobles, was at the same time insider status in another community, the military community. At the end of the 17th century, Ansbach did not have a large standing army. It employed only enough chaplains to accompany Ansbach troops abroad. To compensate, Hocker, though unordained, preached on Sundays to the cadets and the garrison troops in Ansbach. In 1697, with war on the horizon, these troops joined the Imperial Army on the Rhine. And Hocker went as a military chaplain. After a next-day ordination, he preached his inaugural sermon in camp. This flexibility on the part of the Margrave and Hocker in their willingness to pursue an alternative path to patronage and advancement was incredibly common within the quote-unquote outsider military communities of early modern Central Europe. Such membership brought its own antagonisms. Outsiders, especially armed and organized outsiders, were incredibly threatening to the communities they traveled through. The public presence of a rival denomination in a community could also be a lightning rod for conflict. And so military pastors like Hocker came in for their own share of antagonism and mistrust. When Hocker and his regiments were sent to garrison in Cologne, under threat from the French, the townsfolk blocked the gates because they, quote, wanted no heretics as a garrison, end quote. Even after they were allowed to enter the city, the interactions between Hocker's congregation and the Catholic citizens remained uneasy, and military chaplains seemed to be particularly threatening. As Hocker recalled, quote, in the sermons, we were not spared, end quote. Indeed, one Father Schmitz, preaching on the parable of the sower, compared Lutheran military chaplains to the birds which flying down ate up the good seed off the path. As Professor Ben Kaplan has argued, in denominational confrontations, the publicness of an action had a close relationship to the seriousness of the response. Things like church services for minority denominations might be easily tolerated behind closed doors, but could spark violence if done publicly. The punishment of soldierly lawbreaking crossed this threshold of publicness. It was open, religiously charged, and involved the whole community. Furthermore, control over enforcement was seen as a mark of the properly independent and just community. For these reasons, conflict over right of punishment were common and reinforced the outsider status of armies. Hocker and his fellow military chaplains saw the giving of counsel and comfort to the condemned as one of their key duties. This involved them deeply in the public matrix of competition over the execution of justice. While in Catholic Cologne, Hocker counseled a soldier who was facing execution for shooting his host while drunk. Likely sentenced by the civil authorities, the condemned spent his last night in a tower overlooking Cologne's Haymarket, with Hocker attending him. Tensions ran so high, however, that a huge crowd of townsfolk remained outside all night to ensure that justice was done on their terms. Because military chaplains were stereotypically seen to be less pious and more interested in assuaging guilty consciences, Hocker worried that as a Lutheran military chaplain and consoler of the condemned, he would also be in danger if the crowd rioted. To forestall this, and to ensure control over the execution of justice, imperial military authorities spirited the condemned man and Hocker away to the fortified encampment at Mulheim. Not content to be shut out completely, the burghers of Cologne followed as soon as they became aware of the transfer. In spite of the very real divisions between local communities and outsider military communities, Hocker argues that death, and especially a good death, could be a cross-communal connector between outsiders and insiders who nevertheless shared many cultural understandings. According to Hocker, when the executionary ceremony began, the quote-unquote poor sinner took part in the singing, confessed, and received public absolution. He then, with outstretched arms and open eyes, met his judgment joyfully, quote unquote. Whether or not his memories are accurate, a good death of this type, with no tearful pleading, was something understood and valued by all communities in early modern Europe. In Hocker's telling, this death produced a profound effect on the burghers from Cologne, and they went home saying, quote, "What should we really believe?" End quote. And quote, "I wish only that I similarly would be judged as worthy at my ending," end quote. Hocker's arguments align with current scholarly discussions of martyrdom and the good death. Shared values could complicate binary understandings of insider and outsider status. The soldier-civilian divide, which extended to chaplains like Hocker, was a real one and capable of fomenting tremendous conflicts, but it was also porous and often transgressed by people and ideas. In addition to shared values, the privateness of actions could go a long way toward ameliorating religious tensions between local and military communities. In Cologne, for example, despite the public resistance shown to Hocker and the other Protestant military chaplains, they were allowed by the magistrate to freely administer the sacraments in private homes. As with the case of the man who shot his host, such quarterings could place people in too close proximity, but they could also encourage personal relationships which were less susceptible to outsider-insider stereotyping. While in Cologne, Hocker baptized a soldier child. We're not told who the mother was, but the Catholic hostess consented to be godparent. During the ceremony, as she held the child, this lady was crying, and when Hocker asked why, he was told that she, quote, cried for joy as she heard, because our, i.e. Lutheran, children were baptized so beautifully, end quote. Personal relationships built on shared priorities and participation in religious, communal rituals could bridge both civilian, military, and interdenominational divides. They did not, however, always make everyone into one big happy family, as evidenced in this case by Hocker's rather acerbic commentary. Quote, "When they hear us for themselves, the blind people of the papists feel a much milder sentiment for our religion," end quote. The independent authorities of the military community could also, at times, ameliorate tensions between soldiers and local minority communities. Once, while garrisoned in a Dutch reformed town, Hocker was approached by a woman, likely a prostitute, whose illegitimate son was 9 years old and unbaptized. The woman begged Hocker to baptize her child, who had been refused baptism because she would not accept discipline and be reconciled to the Reformed Church. For either Lutherans or Reformed, this was a travesty, but Hocker was concerned that his actions could hurt his troops' relationship to the local community, and at first refused the woman's request. He decided, however, to talk with the local Lutheran pastor. The pastor, who was subject to the city, said that he had encouraged the woman to wait for a Lutheran military chaplain to visit because they weren't bound by local laws. Ultimately, Hocker decided to baptize the child, but secretly. He took them to a nearby village whose pastor had recently died and baptized them in a private house. For all his care not to cause offense, however, Hocker was quite comfortable standing on his own authority as a military chaplain. When confronted by a prominent Reformed minister and told that they had all agreed to treat illegitimate children this way as the best defense against prostitution, Hocker retorted that when a child was refused baptism for 9 years on account of their mother, they were like the injured man in the parable of the Good Samaritan, and that when the local Levites, Reformed ministers in this case, refused to do their duty, it was the common duty of every passing pastor to care for the soul of such a child. While interaction between soldiers and civilians did not always end in violent confrontation, that was nevertheless a real possibility, and the threat of it underlay the tension between the two groups. At the same time, it was not the only divider between individuals and communities in the early modern military milieu. Another potential divider lay in the fact that no early modern army was denominationally homogeneous. The same potential for explosive interdenominational conflict or competitive coexistence existed within armies as existed between armies and their communities. One area where the various denominations within an army were thrown together was in the field hospital. During the imperial siege of Kaiserswerth, in the War of the Spanish Succession, military chaplains, at least one from each of the three main denominations at a time, took turns serving on call at the hospital. Often it was filled with over 1,000 wounded and sick from both sides and from every country, language, and denomination in Europe. Shared care for such a large and diverse body stretched the military chaplains thin. Hocker recalls comforting an Englishman whom he could not find a translator for. Hocker was hesitant to offer the man communion because he did not know, quote, which confession the English soldier preferred, end quote. The man was dying, however, so Hocker prayed with him, and the soldier indicated by signs that he was at peace with this. In this instance, for both Hocker and the dying man, intercession by a pastor was more important than denominational lines. In spite of this potential for religious flexibility, however, it should not be assumed that denominational differences were of no account in the armies. On one occasion, an imperial Reformed military chaplain requested that Hocker come and give communion to the Lutherans in his regiment. As Hocker officiated, an officer, in his hurry to take communion, accidentally jostled the chalice and spilled communion wine all over the hosts. Hocker was in a quandary. He could replace the consecrated wafers he had brought with common bread. If he did this, however, he feared it would look like he was making compromises to the Reformed to please them, because they did not believe in the real presence of Christ in the elements and did not use consecrated wafers. This would have hurt his own reputation as a Lutheran chaplain and was likely to offend the Lutheran troops he'd come to serve. Instead, Hocker opted to quickly dump out the communion bread and separate the wet wafers from the dry. He then broke the dry ones in half and distributed them to the soldiers. While Hocker and the Reformed military chaplain were willing to coordinate pastoral care of their co-religionists, Hocker at least never forgot the rivalry between the two denominations. The coexistence he experienced in the Imperial Army was a competitive one that existed and was maintained by the zeal of many chaplains and their congregations to defend the honor of their denominations, even while maintaining loyalty to the larger military communities they were part of. Standing outside the normal paths to patronage and promotion, military chaplains had to make do with what was available to them. Unlike in the parish church, Hocker and his colleagues needed to exercise a greater degree of independence in order to succeed. Although not normally nobles themselves, military chaplains usually stood at the pinnacle of spiritual care in a given regiment, and so could and did enjoy a much greater familiarity with noble commanders and their officers. In spite of the inequalities of their relationships, or perhaps because of them, successful military pastors like Hocker held a high opinion of the dignity of their spiritual calling and were willing to stand on that dignity. This dignity could certainly be overplayed, as one Prussian military chaplain discovered when he railed against the dancing and dueling of his officers so fiercely that he needed a security detachment after service each day. But military chaplains did not usually achieve success by being lickspittles either. The martial ethic of the camps, which required firm action and bravado in defense of personal and communal honor, was applied to chaplains as well, and successful chaplains like Hocker adopted this ethic willingly. Once, a count took offense when Hocker corrected him for foul language. Hocker responded that, if nobles were to talk like common soldiers, they would demean themselves in the eyes of their subjects. Somewhat mollified, the count later asked Hocker for insight into his lineage, and Hocker said that he could trace the count's family back to the time of Moses, because when Moses had spoken the sixth commandment, do not commit adultery, a noble had objected, saying he could never keep such a rule. The family resemblance was clear to the count, and the story so tickled his fancy that he repeated it many years later. This subtle mix of dignity and deference served Hocker well in the army and after retirement. Based on his own telling, Hocker interacted well with the warrior nobles he encountered. In addition to the Margrave of Ansbach, almost all the powerful patrons Hocker mentions are from the military nobility. Some, like the Field Marshal Graf von Seckendorf, had been among his commanding officers or administrators at the Ansbach Cadet Academy. Others had been among his students. For Hocker and the military chaplains, as for many other early modern outsiders, membership in alternative communities and participation in alternative patronage networks allowed them to flourish, as well as they could, on the margins of the larger European societies. And flourish Hocker did. In the late 1690s, he married the daughter of an Ansbach cleric, and in 1703, Hocker was appointed to the newly vacant positions of deacon and associate pastor in Kreilsheim by the favor of the Margrave. This move bypassed the current pastor's assistant, who otherwise could have reasonably expected promotion. Even after Hocker's appointment, however, he was still an outsider. His supporters, warrior nobles, the Margrave, and the Ansbach church court were primarily from outside the local society, and his detractors were often locals whom he had displaced in his unorthodox promotion path. These locals may have lacked Hocker's friends, but they were embedded in a way that he was not, and as the reformers found, that kind of inertia is incredibly difficult to overcome. Patronage alone could not make an outsider advancement track work. One needed flexibility, personal ambition, and great interpersonal skills, all of which Hocker had developed as a military chaplain. The benefits of these character qualities became clear when Hocker attempted to obtain a dual appointment as pastor and professor at the prestigious Prince's School in Heilsbronn. Patronage rights for the Heilsbronn School, a former Cistercian abbey, were split between the rival territories of Ansbach and Bayreuth, with the latter holding the professorate position. Likely because of funding, the existing professors wanted Hocker to only be a pastor, but Hocker wanted to teach. Accordingly, he mailed his application and then traveled to Bayreuth in person to interview with the church court. Although travel during this period was dangerous, Hocker, the former military chaplain, was quite familiar with it. While he was on the road, however, the Bayreuth church court notified him that the position had been closed with no opportunity of reconsideration. They told him there was nothing to do but to return to Kreilsheim. Rather than returning home, Hocker decided to visit his brother-in-law in Niederland, near Bayreuth. While traveling through Bayreuth, he happened to meet the president of the church court on the street. Hocker, addressing his superior with the practiced ease of an accomplished military chaplain, brought up the terminated professorate position and his own application. So effective was his self-advocacy that the church court decided that very day to reopen the position in Heilsbronn and accept Hocker's application. Hocker may have come to Heilsbronn as an outsider, relying on external authorities and his own ingenuity to compete with local talent, but he did not stay that way. By the time of his death, Hocker's family was insinuated into the ruling structures of the local community. So strong, in fact, did Hocker's position become that when the Prince's School was dissolved in 1736, his influence kept the library holdings from being divided between Ansbach and Bayreuth until 1748, 2 years after Hocker's death. This was in spite of the fact that the Margrave of Bayreuth had in 1743 founded the University of Erlangen and wanted to consolidate his literary holdings there. While there were certainly other factors at play, Hocker's championing of the intact library as an integral part of the cloister's history certainly played a large role. Indeed, Hocker's influence can still be felt. Reunited at the University of Erlangen after Ansbach absorbed Bayreuth in 1769, the Heilsbronn collection today represents one of the most complete and best preserved monastic libraries in existence. By his own telling, it appears that Hocker was uniquely qualified and suited for the strange role of the military chaplain. As I have found researching military chaplains in Hessen Castle, however, the qualities of flexibility, personal ambition, and interpersonal skills that Hocker exhibited were also what separated effective, successful chaplains from yes-men and isolated moralizers. While most certainly outsiders, military chaplains participated in the forging of alternative communities based on shared experience of military service, military noble patronage, and close connection to warlike rulers. Even after retirement, membership in these communities in many ways defined former military chaplains as they pursued promotion and status in the parish church or elsewhere. Thank you.